Wedding programs are kind of a big deal. You better have a precious piece of cardstock to print out the outline of events for that wedding, or it better be on brand for the couple. And if you're gonna have a wedding in here in the middle of the summer, or one of those outdoor weddings, it better also double as a fan, right? There are two other wedding program trends I saw for 2025. I hope they're not too widespread, at least yet. One is the wedding program newspaper, where the whole wedding program is like printed as if it's a tabloid, walking you through the life of the two to be wed. And the other is, and I kid you not, plantable programs. Biodegradable paper that you can plant into the ground that is infused with wildflower seeds so that you can just watch the love of that couple sprout after the wedding. Oftentimes in a wedding program, we see the word homily, which is really just a fancy word for sermon. And homily is also the root word for homiletics, which is simply what we're doing right now, the act or the practice of studying for, crafting, and delivering a sermon. You see, preaching is not only to inform the head. It's not simply about truth, but it's also how that truth ought to impact our lives. If it stops with just head knowledge, then that's teaching. Preaching is directed at the will. Simply stated, it seeks to help us be transformed by God's word into God's likeness, how it impacts what we believe, how it impacts how we act. And last week, Zeb reminded us that the book of Deuteronomy, which we've been working through, is simply Moses preaching to the Israelites. In chapter 12, what Mike read for us earlier really is a beginning of a transition in the sermon of Deuteronomy. We see Moses transitioning from more of the history and the high theological truths, or last week, Moses setting before the blessing and the curses of the Lord, a shift to the how. How ought they to live in this land that they're about to go over? You see, it's really Deuteronomy 12 and 13 is a whole lot of application for the Israelites. So if we're to summarize everything that we just read in one word, it's a word we love to use a whole lot around here, it's the word wholehearted. And Moses lists a whole lot of do's and don'ts for God's people in this morning's passage. Take a look down at chapter 12, verse 4 and 5. These are really the two bottom line points that outline, if you will, for this morning. 4 and 5. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. 1. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. So our basic outline this morning is pretty simple and straightforward. How not to worship God. And then secondly, how to worship God. Now for the theology nerds in there, if you're want to scratch the itch about regulatory or normative principle, I'm not sure that's the primary thrust of this text, but we can talk after. But with that, let's dive in first. How not to worship God. We see in the how not to 4 things that God commands the people to destroy. Right out the gate in chapter 12, verse 2, God tells the Israelites, when they go in, they shall surely destroy all the places where the nations have served their gods, the mountains, the hills, under every green tree. And catch this, he starts listing verbs. You shall destroy, you shall tear down their altars, you shall dash in pieces their pillars, you shall burn their Asherim. You shall chop down the carved image, and just to make a nice bookend, you shall destroy. 6 verbs. This is all-out war against the evil pagan gods that the people of Israel are going into the promised land to dispossess and take over. You see, the scope is comprehensive. All of the places, they need to do this on the high mountains, plural, on the hills, under every green tree. You see, the pagan worshipers, they had co-opted, or they had taken all of these places that the Lord had created and turned them around for the exact opposite purpose, to worship false gods. They had infiltrated the pagan gods and the people, the land that the true Creator made for his own purposes and for his own glory. See, God is not in the business of sharing his glory. He is in the business of showing his glory. And the inhabitants of the land did what Romans calls traded the glory of the immortal God for mere images resembling man, birds, and of all things, creeping things. Yeah, you want to worship a scorpion today? No thanks. You see, this cannot be true for God's people. You see, there is no such thing as half-heartedness for God's covenant people. It's all or nothing. God alone, nothing else. No intermixing worship. Don't worship like they did. It is wholeheartedness, or it's really no-heartedness. That's the first thing to destroy. Don't let it intermix with the worship of the one true God. And the second thing that we see that God tells them to destroy comes in chapter 13. There's 3 sections of chapter 13. The first 5 verses are destroy or kill the false prophet. This is also the first of 3 tests of wholeheartedness. Anyone like playing Bible trivia? There are only 2 legal regulations, if you will, in the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, that pertain to prophets, that say, if this, then that, about prophets. And this is one of them. And it's not really great for the prophet. 13:1. If a prophet or dreamer or dream arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the thing happens, and then they say, let's serve someone else, don't do it. If anyone tells you to serve another god, simple, don't do it. And it doesn't even matter if that person did signs, did wonders, or did something really awesome. It doesn't depend on experience. It's only ever always, what's the test? Not experience. The test is only ever always, what did God say? Remember the 10 Commandments? I am the Lord who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. Person over here, false prophet. Hey, this crazy thing's going to happen. And then the crazy thing does happen. And if they say the opposite of what God said, guess what? Don't listen. Friends, this is why we are only ever always centered on this book here. Because this is what we know God has said to us. This is the truth. And if anything were to go against it, it's not wholehearted. Turn our back to it. Only ever always measure against the word of the Lord. The test of wholeheartedness, even if there's a public prophet who calls something ahead of time and says, let's turn from the Lord, don't listen. Actually, take him out and purge the evil from your midst. It's wholeheartedness or it's no-heartedness. The third thing, this one's hard. We see it in 13, starting in verse 6 through 11. destroy or kill even your loved ones. This is the second test of wholeheartedness. If your nearest relative, your own brother, your wife, or even your child in secret or quiet entices you in the secret place, Moses says, and encourages or entices you to serve another god, it deserves certain death. Now, notice how this is the exact opposite of the prophet. The prophet is calling something publicly, right? All the people hear and see something happening. That deserves death. But even the other side, even the secret sin, when someone just says, why don't we just consider this idol? The secret sin also deserves death. Even in the quietness of your home, if a loved one encourages you, Moses says, to begin to turn your hearts in this secret place, each person is actually responsible to call it out. You see, Moses is implying that to every Israelite, that wholeheartedly following the Lord with everything ought to outweigh everything and everyone. It must outweigh all earthly loves. His instruction is brutal in verse 9. Your hand shall be the first against him, and then afterwards, the hand of all the people. See, this is both an individual test and a corporate, collective, or group test. The infraction, they sought to draw you away from the Lord your God. Friends, this is a hard pill to swallow. And if it ended here, some would say, oh, that's just an Old Testament truth. We can just kind of forget about it. But doesn't Jesus hearken back to this in the New Testament as well? In Matthew 10, Jesus teaches, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. It is wholeheartedness or it is no-heartedness. The infraction of idolatry is so terrible. The sin is so terrible. Why? Here's the bottom line, simple truth. Because idolatry threatens Israel's existence. Idolatry threatens their existence. And that takes us to the fourth thing to destroy, and the third test of wholeheartedness, to make sure that our earthly connections are not greater than our godly connection. In chapter 13, 12 to 18, we see the destroy the city test. Moses tells the people in Israel, if the whole city dwelling in the land that God has sovereignly given to them and freely given to them turns against the Lord who gave it to them, destroy it completely, totally. Burn it, and don't let the devoted things stick to your hands. Don't even touch the spoil. It sounds a whole lot like what Israel's about to go do in Canaan, doesn't it? They're about to wipe it out, wipe out the paganism. Except in this case, it ought not to even be rebuilt. And the words are striking. Moses tells the people that the burning of that city would be like a burnt offering going up to the Lord. This is honestly a difficult truth, isn't it? To know that there are people, and even this March 1st, this weekend, that there would be people in that city who would be killed. If you're wrestling with that truth this morning, we're not going to deal with it because Zeb dealt with it 2 or 3 weeks ago. I encourage you to go to our website and check out the sermons page on Deuteronomy 7. A sermon entitled, "A Chosen People and a Consuming Fire." Why is this destruction okay? But let me illustrate it this way. Question: if you are married this morning, will you allow anyone or anything to begin to win your heart and your affection more than your spouse? What kind of person would you be if we did? Question for all of us. If we saw anyone or anything beginning to cause friction in a relationship, or someone pulling the affection away from a husband or from a wife, what would we do? Would we sit around and just be like, oh yeah, that's nice, and watch that marriage covenant begin to degrade and erode? I sure hope not. Because anything or anyone that begins to threaten the most treasured of earthly relationships, anything that negatively impacts the marriage covenant, must be dealt with. And it's not like, I'll put that on the laundry list to get to next week. No. It must be dealt with quickly and decisively, shouldn't it? Because pornography, emotional connection with somebody else, love of work, even love of children, those things are going to threaten it as time goes on. They're threats that must be dealt with. Why? Because they threaten the very covenant. And allowed to fester, they will just grow and grow and grow. It must be all-out war, shouldn't it? Because the very covenant that stands there is being threatened. That is kind of what's going on here in Deuteronomy 12 and 13. No idolatry, Israel, because it threatens you and who you are. You can't allow any of it. Because there can be no idolatry in a covenant relationship. Drastic consequences require drastic measures. And it's such a slippery slope because it threatens not only their covenant relationship, but if God's people begin to allow the seeds of this grow, kind of like that marriage program, if they allow it to grow, they run the risk of provoking God himself to anger. The last few verses of chapter 12 give us a hint. 12:29 to 32. God tells them, don't even think about how the nations served those pagan gods. Don't even try to learn about it. Wipe it out. Because what's going to happen is it'll seed and it'll grow and it'll grow. Much like the writers of Romans writes, don't even think about how to satisfy the desires of the sinful flesh. Let me just pause here. We all struggle with different things, don't we? But what is one way that you and I think about how to gratify our sinful desires? What's one way? The writer of Romans in Romans 13 says, don't even think about it. And that's the truth that's echoed here in Deuteronomy. Make no provisions, none, no foothold for sinful desires. Because as you do, they will grow and you will be led astray. And the warning culminates in chapter 12, verse 31. These wicked nations that serve these false gods have done every abominable thing that the Lord hates. They have done for their God. For they even burn their sons and daughters in the fire to their gods. We have a gas fireplace in our house, and we've really enjoyed it being this cold, except when gas prices went up like 7x those couple weeks, right? And it's one of those gas fireplaces that you need two hands. You have to push in the supply line, and it's not a battery-powered igniter. It's one of those ones you have to like push with 10 pounds of force. Some of you know what I mean. So you have to press the supply line, and then you have to push the igniter, real difficult. It's almost impossible to do with one hand because you either press the igniter and let go of the supply line, or you do the opposite. Well, since Elizabeth was born, I have gradually learned to master, I guess it's dad skills, the art of holding her in one hand and pushing both buttons with just a couple fingers. It's I tried it before she was born, and I was unable. So chalk that up to what you will. But sometimes as I'm lighting the fire and I'm holding her away from the fire, it's gas. And if I don't get it the first time, it kind of has a little bit more of a whoosh, a little bigger flame, and I whoop, pull her away from there. And there have been a number of instances where I think of this passage that Moses reminds the people. And so much can be said here. These pagan nations have done everything that God hates and detests. And of all the things, lying, cheating, stealing, murdering, Moses chooses one just to demonstrate the most terrible and just how wicked they had become. And what is the one that he chooses? They even burn their sons and daughters to their gods. The pagan gods and the selfish hearts of the people have caused them to murder their own dear children. So much can be said here. But let me bottom line it with this simple truth. And honestly, in a weekend like this, with bombs flying around the world, I think it's a helpful truth. Because how do we justify what God just said, what Moses says? God hates that, but to destroy others. Here's the bottom line, I think, that I've been helped with. God detests the intentional murder of innocent human life. Of all the sins that could have been listed, that's the one. God detests the intentional murder of innocent human life. They sacrificed their own children for their own selfish desires, wants, and intentions. And so, thousands of years later, it still remains. Friends, it is such a slippery slope when we allow the seeds of idolatry and the seeds of sin to begin, and we don't yank it out when it first sprouts. How are we, Christ Fellowship Church, protecting ourselves? How are we protecting our families, our church, our society as we wholeheartedly follow the Lord? Are there these little things we're willing to say, you know what, I'm willing to overlook this one? Or are we saying, no, it's going to be hard, but it's worth pulling that out? Because we ought not, the Israelites ought not to worship the Lord in that way of the pagans. The stakes are high because there can be no idolatry in a covenant relationship. It is wholeheartedness or no-heartedness. We see the converse here as well. Let's look back to 12:4 and 5. Again, just the high-level outline, if you will. 12:4. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, how the pagans do it. Don't do it. Deal with it. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. Throughout chapter 12, there is a whole lot of talk about the word place. And there were two places in view here. One, in the general place of Israel, the land, the inheritance that the people were going to be living in. And then we also saw the place where the Lord will make his name to dwell. The people are going to the land in general. This is their inheritance. 12:9 tells them that they're coming to the rest and to the inheritance that the Lord your God is giving you. Friends, this is the promised land. They're about to make it over. This is the good land, a sweet land, a blessed land where they can have rest and where they can also have freedom. You see, I'm tempted, if this were a youth group, I would say, raise your hand if you got lost in all of the offerings and sacrifices when we were reading today. But it's not youth group, so we're not going to. It was kind of easy to get lost, and you can sacrifice this and do this here, but don't do that there. Here's a brief summary of all that we read there. Leviticus 12 provides a brief synopsis of how things, namely animals, even if you were going to eat the animal, what needs to be done with them after they're killed. Basically, it says, if an animal is killed, even if you're going to make jerky out of it, you take it to the tabernacle or the tent of meeting before you go and make your jerky. Now, imagine that's you and you're thinking, oh my, when I go over to this land and I want to have chicken noodle soup this week, and I have to put the chicken in the car, drive down to Washington, D.C., and drive all the way back, I'm probably not going to be eating chicken noodle soup this week. It's going to spoil. And so here we actually see the great grace in some of God's rules here. And Moses tells the people there's freedom and rest here in Deuteronomy 12 because he's telling them that they can simply eat meat. They don't have to bring it to the temple. They don't have to bring it to the tabernacle. Just enjoy the meat. Enjoy the fruit of the land. It's really going to be a land of freedom and of blessing. See, so often people view God's rules and regulations as restrictive. But when we live in them as all they are intended to be, it's actually the opposite. The people can simply eat meat, a luxury in that day. So the psalmist writes, the laws of the Lord are perfect. It is because of his rules and regulations that enable freedom and it unlocks joy for the people. Moses tells the people when they're eating meat in their towns to rejoice. In 12:18, you shall rejoice before the Lord your God in all that you undertake. You can rejoice. There's only one exception to the slaughter of animals, and that is if it is going to be an offering. In that case, the people are to take that offering, to the place where God is going to make his name to dwell, where he's going to put his name, where he will make his habitation. 12:5. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out of all your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. There you shall go, and there you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and your contributions that you present, your vow offerings, your free will offerings, and the firstborn of your herd and your flock. By the way, this is a comprehensive list of all of the offerings and sacrifices in the Old Testament. Guess what? Wholehearted, all of them. Where are you supposed to take them? To the place that God's presence is going to be. Wholehearted worship comes from people who offer everything that they have and everything that they are to the God who has given all of it to them. And the fact that God is choosing a place for his name to dwell, for him to be worshiped, shows us two very powerful things. The first is that it is God's right to give the land. He made it, after all, so he can sovereignly give it to his covenant people, can't he? He knows all of the earth. All of it is his and the abundance therein. And I don't know about you, Christian, but this weekend, you can hold on to the truth that there is not one speckle of dust on planet Earth, and there's not one drop of water that floats boats that is not his and that he's not sovereign over. He's choosing a place for his name to dwell there in the land of Israel because it's his to give. And so it remains even to this day. Secondly, and this is even more encouraging and more joyful, the fact that God is choosing a place for his name to dwell proves to you, Christian, that he is a relational God, that he wants people to know what he is like, that he wants people to see what happens when he is present. He's not like the Greek gods on the pinnacle of Mount Olympus that no one ever climbs, or like Poseidon in that palace in the bottom of the sea. He's not like the Norse gods who are just stuck in another dimension. He's not like Hindu gods on a shelf collecting dust. He's not like the deist god flipping the channel on TV and his lazy boy. No. This is the creator of all, who holds it all together by the power of his will, who crafted every single one of you in his very own image. And the fact that he's putting his name in a place in the temple in Old Testament times ultimately is proving that God wants his people to encounter him. And here in Deuteronomy 12, God is not generally commanding the people to go into the land in general, but he's telling them to seek the specific place where he's going to make his name to dwell. And ultimately, where is that? Ultimately in Jerusalem, and more specifically, it will be in the temple. Do you know what, at the end of the day, the temple really is? It's God's encounter house, where people can encounter him, where not only Israel, but foreigners and even sojourners can see what God Most High is like. The place where people will continue to offer their sacrifices. The place where they will continue to grow in relationship with the one true God. And again, Moses calls the people to rejoice in 12:12 and also in 12:7. Whenever they go to this special encounter house, to the place where God will choose to make his name to dwell there, there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which the Lord has blessed you. Because not only is he blessing you with food and freedom and joy, he's blessing you with his very own self, with his presence. And that presence ought to bring up in us great joy. And there's a command here that the people cannot take their sacrifices anywhere else. They can only bring their sacrifices and their offerings to this place where God is making his name to dwell. Students, imagine it's Valentine's Day. I just got like a couple like side eyes. Imagine it's Valentine's Day and you finally have the special date with your crush. This isn't next year, it's 15 years from now, by the way. And you do whatever, and you go to the fancy restaurant with the candles, and you're sitting there, and you get there early, 20 minutes early. Oh, maybe they'll come 10 minutes early and just show how excited they are. 10 minutes passes, 7 o'clock passes, and finally you realize you've been stood up. You go home like this, and you bring up enough guts to text them and say, hey, are you okay? You really just want to know why they didn't show up. And they respond, oh, I planned another date. Ouch. There's a sense in which that rejection is kind of like what God is, kind of like the Israelites not bringing their offerings where God told them to go, isn't it? Because them not bringing their offerings to the temple is not only disobedience, but it's rejecting God and his presence, the one who made his name to dwell there so that people can know what he's like, and saying, you know what, I don't even care. I'm going to do it my way, God. I'm going to go to the place I want to do it. I like my way a little bit better. It's a little easier to not have to travel. That sounds a whole lot like idolatry, doesn't it? Wholeheartedness or no heartedness. And finally, we see one other notable rule, if you will, in chapter 12, verse 23. This is worth reading together. Only, 12:23, be sure that you do not eat the blood, for the blood is the life, and you shall not eat the life with the flesh. The word blood showed up a whole lot, and if you're queasy, I'm sorry, in the reading today. And particularly this prohibition against eating it. Don't eat it. Eat meat all day long. Don't eat the blood. And this harkens back to God's words to Noah in Genesis 9 saying, don't eat the blood. Why? Because the blood is the life. The blood is the life. Why did the Israelites have to bring their burnt offerings to the place where God would make his name to dwell? Because it's there where God's presence is, where the blood must be shed, and the life of the animal then covers the life of the person, because the only punishment for sin is death. Without the shedding of the lifeblood, there is no forgiveness of sins. And further, Moses tells them not only don't eat it, but he tells them to do something honestly a little bit grotesque, to pour it out on the earth like water. But can you just imagine in such a situation how much of a reminder that would be to the people that they need to be atoned for. They need their sins to be covered. They need the life of another to cover their own, because they cannot work their way into a perfect relationship with the Lord. As Hebrews tells us, it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. It could merely cover for a time. And here's the beautiful thing for you and for me this morning. The temple the sacrificial system, no longer remains. The temple is no longer here. The one true God chose not just a place for his name to dwell, but he gave his very own son in Jesus Christ by sending him in our own fleshly likeness, sending it like a human so that we can see another human. And by seeing Jesus, by knowing Jesus, we can therefore know what God's like. Jesus being, God's word being his encounter house, if you will, to us today. You can encounter the one true living God this morning because Jesus has showed us what he is like. See, the God who seeks a covenant relationship with his people is not confined to a physical location. No. You don't have to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca or Jerusalem or pick your place. Because as Hebrews 9 tells us, Jesus, entered once for all the holy places, not by the means of the blood of goats and calves, but by the means of his own blood, thus securing an eternal redemption, a forever redemption. And because of that, you, Christian, are God's encounter house too for Washington, Pennsylvania. Christ Fellowship Church is God's encounter house for this community and for this world. Because do you not know that you are God's temple, God's Spirit dwelling in you? Or as Peter writes, you yourselves, church, are like living stones being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood and to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. We are now God's encounter house through the world with his Spirit working in and through and around us. And he's given us the distinct joy of his presence through Christ's work on the cross. And so, in comparison to his great benefits for you, why would we stoop to offer anything else than our whole hearts, our minds, our body, all of our strength? Wholehearted living ought to be our great joy. Living out loud in the workplace, opening up our homes to share life as he has shared his with us, opening up the abundance of our material blessings for others. The list goes on and on and on. Oh, that we would be a people here, not marked by our beautiful pews, although they are, not marked by red carpet, as long as it's been here, not marked by anything other than wholeheartedly following the Lord Jesus Christ in everything and having no taste for even the seeds of idolatry.